All right, everyone, welcome along. We are joined today, myself and Emmett, by Irish artist Jim FitzPatrick. How are you doing, Jim?
I'm doing good, absolutely. Enjoying lockdown.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not a popular thing to say, but I also sort of enjoyed it as well. I enjoyed the break.
Well, I was the ultimate social, so it comes as a big surprise to me how much I've enjoyed lockdown, being left to myself.
Yeah, was it also just allowing yourself to get back, like to connect with work again? Was that another part of the lockdown that appealed to you?
In a way, it's just I didn't realize how much time I spent in town Dawson, especially in Holt, Dawson in the morning with coffee morning up in Il Panorama and local fucking little restaurants, coffee shops. I love all that. So that had to stop, obviously. But I mean, I still meet someone at least once or twice a week, but I don't party as such.
Yeah.
In other words, the time I say, I don't know if I put it to the best use I could have. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's always a question, like when you get this kind of time to have to yourself, which I've always wanted, it's like you try to do too much. I've been a vast amount of work and I'm stopping now saying, why am I doing this? It's like an addiction,
Yeah.
I'm like a junkie who simply can't get off the track,
Yeah. Can I take you all the way back to when you first started? And some of my favorite artwork of yours, like I was telling you before, was like the calendars you put out, which have a lot of your Celtic kind of folklore and fantasy stuff. Is that something you've had an interest in since you were a child? Kind of Celtic mythologies and that?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time when I was young. Well, I grew up in a strange household. I was abandoned by my rather wealthy father. So my mother and myself had to live with relatives, her relatives. And my mother had owned a house opposite the house we lived in, right? But obviously it enjoyed herself too much and spent it. So we ended up living in a little tiny house in St. Michael's Road in Glasnevin, which it was go down there when I pass by. I often go down and just have a look at it. And I grew up in a house with 4 women, my mother being the worker, and my 2 aunts and my grandmother. So it was a different way of being. And if you can imagine that period in the 50s in Ireland, very few men around. Most of them had emigrated and most of them vanished. So I grew up in a house full of women from County Clare, essentially. And every pishogue and every little superstition you could imagine was brought into that house. Yeah. So when I got to spend time later, I'd had TB, so my mother thought I was too fragile for another epidemic, which is the polio epidemic. So she got me out of Dublin, down to my relatives in Clare. And that's when I really got into the mythology. As well, then it would have been folklore. But it morphed into mythology and an interest in real mythology much later. So I was aware of every superstition you could imagine. Like my aunt used to leave milk out for the fairies. I always regarded her as semi-mystical, still do.
Yeah.
Don't come on her own because her husband had to work. He'd no children at that point. She's 5 or 6 now. She's dead, God rest her. She was the kindest woman I've ever met. And her dad was a storehouse of all Celtic, fairy tales, for want of a better word. The sort of stuff you'd read in Yeats's Fairy Tales of Ireland and Lady Gregory, the Children of Lear, the Tuatha Down, and all these names kind of flowed out of him as he talked. And of course, I found this fascinating because it was around the turf fire. There's no electricity in the house when I moved in there. You know what I mean? It was a cottage. It was a attached cottage up on top of a hill in Fountain Cross in Kilcurrish. Now it's a proper bungalow. But back then, there was no toilet even. Do you know what I mean? There was no shower.
Right.
You went out and there's a big tub of rainwater and you washed your body with that, but you washed your face with house water, which I got from the well, Now the well was a good long bit away and you had to climb over a bloody big wall, one of these stone walls that could crumble at any minute under.
Right.
So I learned so much and I learned to keep quiet and observe. So I would sit on a rock for hours to watch everything from pine martens to, rabbits, hares, wildlife. the most interesting was the red stoat, which I think is fairly rare, but there was one there always. You used to come up in the morning and just sit by the pond waiting. Obviously gonna grab fish or something, but once you stood still and sat, all these things happened around you. Now, at the same time, there were cows that kept coming over and annoying me because I was friendly with one of them. I used to ride around on it, right? The dogs would come over. Everything came over to you if you sat quiet long enough.
Yeah.
I felt like St. Francis. All I had to put up my hand and the birds would probably feed off me, But it was a beautiful way to grow up. And it was only a short period of my life. I exaggerated in my own mind because it was so pivotal,
Yeah.
And when did you first start like illustrating, or when did it turn to that?
When I went to, when I was in St. Patrick's School in Drumcondra, where I grew up, the teacher, Mr. Kleins, had a great love of art. So he had art competitions all the time. And I always remember there was a film called The Robe, a very famous film at the time. I started drawing a comic book of The Robe, and it was only like that size. It wasn't big, because I wanted to hide it in my school book. So while he was rattling on about whatever the show he was going on about, maths and algebra, I was drawing The Robe. And one day he caught me, and that's when he said to me, just keep drawing. And he let me off. Now, that's very unusual. These were tough teachers. Like, he was one of the kinder ones, but he still managed to use the bootstrap on me a couple of times, and you could feel it. And I always remember the poor man saying to me, the straps were that thick, 6 layers of leather. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was pretty unruly, So I remember I had to put out my hand. I closed my eyes because I know it's going to hurt like fuck. And he said to me, "This will hurt you more than it'll hurt me." And now, when I think back, such a kind thing to say, but at the time I thought, "Oh, fucking hit yourself, you bastard." Stop hitting me. And then there was a guy called Johnny Bruder. I've always remembered him because he was the most rebellious of all. And he didn't get Klein's strap, but he got another strap of one of the head teachers, I think the head honcho. And he fucked, there's a little lane way down, not a laneway, a little ramp down to the river just beside the school. And he fucked it into the talca there. And we were all sent in to fish it out. Luckily, we didn't find it. But he was expelled from St. Pat's. But I always remember his name, Johnny Bruder, because of Bruder, who killed Brian Boru.
Yeah.
So he was obviously a close descendant, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the other things you did in your artwork, obviously famously, was the Thin Lizzie, the cover art for some of their albums. And was Phil a good friend of yours, or how did that all come about?
Well, I knew George Harrison when I was a kid in Portrand. He holidayed there. If you just go to a little road in Drumcondra called Clontarf, if you know Talca Park, from first gate,
the football
there's
stadium.
There's a laneway opposite 3 little bollards to block off traffic so they can't go through it. And that there. I played in Talca Park loads of times. I played twice for Ireland under Mick Byrne. But anyway, I was going to make a point there somewhere. What was the question you asked? I've gone off on a rant.
It was just to do with Thin Lizzie, and was Phil a friend of yours, or how it all came about?
Oh yes,
artwork for that album, those albums.
George Harrison. Around the corner was George Harrison's mother's sister, and they were the Frenches, and I went to school with Paddy French. But they also had a Nissan hut that they rented during the summer in Portrand, as did the family I lived with, right?
Yeah.
So George Harrison obviously played with us all, and we were all curious. Liverpool accent, because it was so unusual, if you can imagine.
Yeah.
But long story cut short, I worked in advertising after I left college, and I was working with a guy called Miles Davenport, who had a band, and it was before the Beatles, just before them, and he had a 4-piece band, and we thought this was really going somewhere. So I did a logo for him and the design, right? And that got me into it. So all the time I was working in advertising, I started doing a lot of freelance work. My first gigs were for Gail Inn. I did an EP cover for Sean O'Riordan, Cool na Lee, the songs of the Lee. I did the Chieftains stuff, not the stuff for Garrett, for Brown. This was before he set up that record label. I did work for Gaylin, so I was doing mixers for Gaylin because I had a young child and I needed money. I was working in advertising, very well paid, but the mixers paid for the hospital bills and her birth. So that's when I started doing record covers, and that came to the attention of different people. Noel Pearson over the years commissioned me for different bands. Again, before Tin Lizzy, you know.
Yeah.
I worked for Emmett Spike and Donald Lunny. I did a poster for them. A band called The Movement, who actually were friends of Philip, you know. So I did a lot for The Movement, I did one of the best psychedelic posters ever because I was big into psychedelia. I became great friends with the American artists, Rick Griffin, Stanley Mouse, Kelly, all the guys who did the Grateful Dead and the great San Francisco poster explosion. So I was doing this in Dublin. And that coincidentally brings me to Tin Lizzy because Eamon Carr, a poet friend of mine who was a journalist as well, a music journalist, was in a band called Horselips. But before that, he was a poet with Peter Fallon in a beat group called Tara Telephone. And I was involved with them because I did all the covers for it and the graphics, right? And we had a magazine called Capella. We had another one called The Book of Invasions. It was like a broadsheet. And it was a very vibrant scene, like to the good grace of BP Fallon, we had John Lennon giving us drawings and stuff for the magazine, lyrics. Mark Bolan, who gave us loads of stuff and used to come to Dublin all the time. He was a beautiful young man. David Bowie, before he became really famous. A lot of people all collaborated with us, but it's because Peter Fallon was BP Fallon's brother. Peter's the poet who ran Gallery Press, still does. And that brought me into that circle. And one day, Philip Lyon called into Eamon Carr, who was one of the Tara Telephone. And I had done 2 poster poems, one for Eamon called A Song of Love, and one for Peter Fallon called, God, it was about, I put Man MacLear as a sea god in it. No Exit, it was called. So these were really cool psychedelic posters. Like Eamon's one, to give you an example, was printed on fuchsia in silver.
Right.
And if you turned it a certain way, you could see it, but if you didn't, your eyes would go pop.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I still have all these. I gave Peter. Peter had lost his own. I gave Peter a copy of his own one and one of Eamon's. I kept my 25. They're in a drawer here still. But Philip saw these on Eamon's wall and said, "Oh, that's cool work. You know, I love fucking San Francisco psychedelic art, West Coast, blah blah blah." And Eamon said, "No, that local guy, Jim FitzPatrick, who does all this crazy shit. Do you know what I mean?" And Philip said, "Oh, I'd like to meet him." So long story quite short, another friend of mine, Tim Booth, a superb artist, was doing all Philip's early work. He did the first Tin Lizzy logo, which is like a Chevrolet lettering, right? Yeah. It was on Vagabonds. I used it because Tim gave me the template, and I used that because that was the logo before I designed the famous one. And Tim couldn't do the artwork because his band, Dr. Strangely Strange, was signed by Chris Blackwell to Island Records. So that precluded him from doing the album cover. He couldn't even do his own album cover, which is a pain in the arse. But that was the very first album cover my other friend, Roger Dean, did.
Right.
The guy famous for Yes, and that film Avatar ripped off every one of his designs. They're now paying him for it, you know. But anyway, I ended up doing Tin Lizzy's work because Frank Murray knew me because we played football together for a team called Energy Reserves with Peter Fallon as well. And we were good. Didn't lose for about a year. And once we lost, we gave up. But Philip came over to Dublin with Frank to meet me, and we met up in Neary's Bar. This is Frank Murray, who later went on to become manager of the Pokes, right? But to me, he was always Philip's best friend. He was Philip's right hand. You know, myself and Frank were great friends up to a couple of days before he died. You know, he made an arrangement to see him, but he was dead by the time we got around to it, as happens when you get older. But Frank introduced me to Philip. We hit it off immediately. He loved the work I did. He'd seen my covers for Capella. He'd seen the posters that Eamon Carr showed him. and he wanted something different, and he wanted it Irish. He was very patriotic, much more patriotic than I am, or was even. He was intensely Irish, and he wanted everything. You know, in those days, a band could not succeed in Ireland. That's why they had to leave. U2, thank God, changed their template. You know, we owed them for that. Now we're bursting with fucking talent, especially Black Irish hip hop, which I follow. And back then, we were so isolated. So the idea of an Irish artist working for a company like Decca and doing groundbreaking work was quite sensational. But it was up my alley. You know?
Yeah.
I wasn't competing in Ireland. I was competing with Roger Dean, who did all these Yes covers, all the psychedelic stuff.
It was really elaborate.
Even Vertigo, who I was working with later for Tin Lizzie, on the Lizzie albums, there's a Roger Dean label with the floating island. Beautiful stuff. I loved all that. So that's how I was working for Tin Lizzie.
I was just curious though, when you're doing like an album sleeve, was the band like directing you? Were you reacting to the music? Did they come to you with an idea, or did you pitch to them? Something like Jailbreak.
Different every time. For Vagabonds, it was very simple. It was a fait accompli. Oh, you have a cat. Mine are all dead. They died from that fucking bad food that they're now writing about in The Guardian.
Oh, sorry.
Don't feel them all paws.
No.
Or our
okay.
paws.
I won't.
Because my 2 pet fucking cats died from it. You know? I thought it was my negligence until I read The Guardian there last week.
That's awful. Yeah, I think Willow might try to get in on this interview a bit, so I apologize for that.
Don't worry about cats, don't bother me. But anyway, working for Tin Lizzie was very unusual because I had been working to a company called Alan Aldridge Associates. Alan Aldridge is the biggest sort of pop artist in Britain at the time, doing all the covers of Penguin books. He did all the work for the Beatles, illustrated lyrics. He did wonderful books like The Butterfly Ball, all this. He was huge at the time. He was the most influential English designer artist I can think of. Victoria and Albert, before he died, put on a huge show of his works. His son is Miles Aldridge, that brilliant photographer. His daughter is Lily Aldridge. But Alan took to my work and his company became my agent. So I was doing really top-class work in Britain before Lizzie. So when we had what's called the petrol crisis, the biggest recession in Irish history, I had left my really well-paid job in advertising. Like I was earning more than the president at the time.
Right.
And I had a family of 2 kids, and I had to feed and educate them, right? And they were in Wesley College across the road from where I lived, and that was costing me. So I had to find work. So I went over to England. I worked in a place called the Drawing Room, where you hired a desk under Alan Aldridge's company's name. And I started picking up huge amounts of work and bringing it back to Ireland. In those days, you could fly easily. But with the petrol crisis, Aer Lingus's fares went from 30, 40 quid up to 200, like 2,000 quid now.
Yeah.
To fly from Dublin to London and back, which I was doing regularly because I'd have meetings over there for work.
Yeah.
And I worked with all the top agencies, J. Walter Thompson, Michael Peters, you name them. But working with Tin Lizzie was different because you asked me, what way did I work with them? When you work with advertising, you get a very tight brief. You know, I worked for Guinness, for instance, and they gave me real hop leaves, right? And photographs of real hop leaves, right? Everything that I could ever want as reference to do a painting of hops, of a field of hops and all that kind of shit. With band, it's different. And with Lizzie, it was totally different. I had already worked with Polydor before Lizzie. I did an album cover for Planksty, right? Which is a good example of how it works because they gave me a design, which I had to stay with the letter, with the numeral 2 on it, designed like a Celtic manuscript. And the rough was beautiful, but a bit crude. And they said, we want something really brilliant, like a real manuscript. So I sat down and did a real manuscript. And the guy who did the rough turned out to be an Irish guy. I think was it Francis Drake? I think was his name. And he was totally peeved and angry. And I got these angry phone calls saying I'd stolen his work. I'd never heard of him. I just went to the Polydor's office and they gave me 2 jobs to do. That was one of them, right? And I knew Planksty, I knew Christie, I knew I better be careful what I say here, because on the cover of Planksty, there's personal references to things they got up to that they never quite forgave me for. If you look at the album Planksty 2, you'll know what I mean. So there's dancing girls in it with pints of Guinness and all kinds of shit. But anyway, long story quite short, Philip loved what I was doing. So he asked me to do the cover of Vagabonds. And it was literally as open as that. We want you to do the cover of Vagabonds. There was no mention of what it should look like, what kind of imagery I should use. So I did a couple of roughs, which I still have. I often show them on the net. They were quite comprehensive. One was for a gatefold, which would have been brilliant. And I'd drawn them in pencil and pastel. But when it came to the finished art, I had so much freedom that I decided to do a pen and ink drawing and paint it. And what I would do is a pen and ink drawing, I would transfer to cell, because I have a big photographic camera up in my attic, which I still have. And I transfer it onto like animation cell and then paint it at the back. That way the colors were really vivid. So that's how I created Vagabonds. And that was the start of a long career working for bands, especially Lizzie. You know?
Yeah, I just love the variety of the covers, though, in that, like, Johnny the Fox obviously has the kind of Book of Kells type thing, while Jailbreak seems like a Marvel comic to me or something. There's just a great variety across the sleeves.
Well, myself and Philip were huge. I mean, I have the biggest Marvel comic collection you can imagine. I have every Silver Age comic. Like the Silver Surfer's first appearance of Fantastic Four, I bought 4 fucking copies of it. They're up in the bag.
That was good. Yeah. That was good thinking. That was good.
Oh, I knew prescient. I got to know Jack Kirby much later in life, actually. An amazing man, because I was a guest of honor all the time at San Diego Comic Con. And I still get asked. I did the introduction only last year for Liam Sharp's Brave and the Bold for DC Comics, which was kind of contentious, because the reason I got the gig was there was a girl in Palestine called Ahad Tamimi, whose younger cousin, the Israelis, had blown a fucking piece of his head off, right? And a Jewish doctor in Tel Aviv managed to keep him alive and sew his head back on, but he's got a crater in the head. And then they arrested Ahad for slapping one of the soldiers, right? Just slapped him. So she was under threat from an Israeli guy who posted on the net that we'll wait until the controversy dies down and the foreign press are no longer interested, and we'll get the girls in the middle of the night. So I thought, fuck them. So I did Ahad Tamimi, but I did her as Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman was Gail Gadot, who was a Israeli paramilitary, right? Yeah. That was enough for me. So I used the Wonder Woman logo, right? And I can give you the versions if you need them for whatever you're doing. But I did one in English, and then an Arab calligrapher living in Canada said, I can do an Arab version of that for you, which is brilliant. So I did that too. It's actually much the better one. And I did the painting of Ahad Tamimi holding the Palestinian flag from a photograph by a guy called Haim Hurt. His name's got out of my head, but he's a Jewish photographer, he's a very brave kid. And it went viral. So it came to the attention of DC that I was using their Wonder Woman logo. I wrote, there's only one Wonder Woman. And this was Ahad Tamimi.
Yeah.
So out of that, I ended up, despite reviews, doing the intro for The Brave and the Bold for a friend of Gail Gadot, Liam Sharp, right? Yeah. And that's it. Yeah. So you get all I get sidetracked when I'm talking, because so many different memories and they overlap.
Well, I was actually just going to show you that right next to me is actually an artist edition Jack Kirby Fantastic Four thing right next to me in the room. So when you mentioned that, I was like,
let's have a look. What is it?
It's very cumbersome and giant, but it's a breakdown of his original art for Fantastic Four.
That original art?
It's a book that sort of reprints the art.
Oh, right. I haven't got that. What the hell is that?
I just picked it up last time I was in Dublin, actually. But sorry, just when you mentioned Jack Kirby, and it's like right next to me here. So
right.
Funny.
I'll have to go down. Will you send me the name of that book, and I got it from Forbidden Planet?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But as I said, I you can definitely see the influence, like, is in even in the way you do the Celtic interpretations, almost seemed prescient. I think it's like, do you see that Cuchulainn book that Will Sliney put out a few years ago? Yeah. It reminds me a lot of your style as well. It's definitely, you can see your influence kind of across the way.
we're all little fucking magpies, or what do you call those guys who steal rooks, ravens? We nick things, you know. Ravens love glittery things. When we're young, we love shiny things. And Jack Kirby and the Marvel Universe was the shiniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I loved it. I used to scour the comic shops in Ireland. There weren't many. There's a place in Baggot Street, Banba Books, in Tara Street. There was a place at the back of Marlborough Road. There was all kinds of little small places that sold American comics. I spent my life there. And then when I was coming and going to England, the shop opened called Dark Day Wear and Golden Eye, which is the very first comic shop. And you walked in, it was just wall-to-wall comics. Long Forbidden Planet, who became great friends of mine, they became my distributors. Yeah. So I've always interconnected with comics. I mean, I used to go with Tin Lizzie with 2 bags. One was a square bag, which held records, because Philip would bring me down to the vaults. And you could take what you wanted. I have originals by Howlin' Wolf, Little Walter, Fats Domino, you named them, all the greats of blues, right? They're still in the shrink wraps, 2 of them. You know what I mean? I love that sort of stuff. So I'd fill up the bag and then we signed for it on the way out. Nobody cared, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because Philip was so powerful that they do anything to please him, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, and I was just the tail end of it. I was in there in his coattails getting me boxes of fucking records. And it was wonderful. But with comics, I went over to Dark Day wearing Golden Eye, and I had a suitcase for fucking comics. I'd buy so many of them. So I come home with 2 suitcases full of stuff. One I paid for, the other we'd nicked, you know. It was just fabulous. You know? And that seeped in then to Jailbreak, which is very, very Marvel comic, deliberately like a Marvel comic cover. Plus, we got to do the Gatefold, which was discontinued, unfortunately, after the first run. But Johnny the Fox, like you said, is really more sort of neo-Celtic, and that came from a rough where Philip loved the border. Well, I was doing the Planet of the Apes thing in the inside frame, but this warrior looking at the Statue of Liberty buried in the sand, like in Planet of the Apes, you know. And in Jailbreak, in the Gatefold, when you opened it out, there was a War of the Worlds reference as well, which is interesting because Philip went on then to be part of Jeff Wayne's War of the World crew. He played the Pachter, you know. So there's all kinds of interesting small connections there, you know.
It sounds like you like sneaking in kind of secret things into the covers as well, little Easter eggs.
All the time, secret messages. Even the Che is the classic example of that. The most famous Che version and the biggest seller on all posters is called the Warhol Che. And that's my image multiplied by 6 in different colors. It's a magnificent piece of work, right? Unfortunately, now when I say it's the Warhol Che, I know the story of it, I don't go into here, it's too complicated, but it wasn't his work. It was the work of Jared Malanga, his assistant, who stole the screens and printed them off in Rome, was arrested and only freed when he signed over all his royalties and all the rights and everything else back to Warhol. The Warhol Institute have realized, thanks to my lobby, that my name is on all 6 images, right? Or 9, is it? Oh, there's 9 images in that one. Yeah. Anyway, is it 6 or 9? Yeah, 9. And if you look on the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a disguised F. And that's now known, you know, in all the books written about the Che thing, as the hidden logo. And I learned that trick when I was in advertising, when they wouldn't let me sign stuff. I would work away putting a logo in. So I could say to my kids, look, there's my name. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that trick means that the Warhol Institute have now reassigned the copyright of that back to me. Because you can't steal somebody's work if their name is on it.
Yeah.
I did that with Jeff, the guy who did Marilyn Monroe, Bert Stern. He did the famous Marilyn Monroe, you all know.
Yeah.
He simply cut out a magazine, stuck it on a scanner, or not the scanner in those days, a photographic plate camera like I have, copied it, and then handed it to his assistants to do various permutations of. But a judge ruled in court that he had created a standalone work of art. So Stern could get no royalties from that, which I feel is kind of wrong as well, but that's another day's work. I'm an expert on copyright.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Unwillingly, because I have to be, you know.
Yeah, with the Che Guevara painting that you did you ever, when you're doing that expect it to travel the way it did across the world?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was done for that purpose. No other purpose at all. I was working in advertising. I started a founder member of a new agency called Wilson Hartnell.
Mm-hmm.
And they would do anything to get publicity. So when I did a Che, you couldn't believe this. I did the first Che, not the one you know, a black and white one. Wilson Hartnell used their PR department, which they'd only just formed, Mary Finan, very powerful woman, businesswoman, and they promoted the Che poster in every newspaper in Ireland. The tagline always said, and he's an art director at Wilson Hartnell Advertising.
Right.
So it benefited both of us. But when I saw how that could be done, and then I saw the way it had traveled so successfully, I did a couple more versions, but it was the third version I did, the black and red one that you know.
Mm-hmm.
When I was approached to do an exhibition in London called Viva Che in May of 1968. So in 1967, they approached me. I did the black and red one photographically. There's no black and red image per se. There's a black and white image that I have the original of. And the color I put in an overlay. And I'd mark it like red here, no face tone, white, leave the white come true. Basic instructions. I still have all that stuff, you know, it's up in the net. I put it up every now and then to remind people. But that went over to London and for an exhibition called Viva Che. And what happened was when I went over there a couple of months later, I had all these endless phone calls saying it's arriving, and I've got confirmation notes and all saying we have it, it's arrived, blah, blah, blah. So I have a good, you know, tracking on it historically. There's now history. And the guy involved, Peter Meyer, was a critic for Studio International who organized the Viva Che exhibition. And whatever happened, he vanished and I never heard from him again. There were no phone calls returned, nothing. All the stuff, I sent over an original painting. I sent over the original of the first red, black and white one, right? That I referred to, you know, as the first Che. And I sent over one or two other items as well for the exhibition and they vanished without trace. Never saw them again. So luckily, because I had a thing called a Grant camera, I photographed the black and white Che, right? To make it smaller because it was, to make it bigger because it was quite small. It was A3 size, I think. So I wanted it to be A2, that they could blow it up to A1. There were no A sizes in those days, they were imperial. But anyway, luckily I have the original of the original, you might say, the black and white of the red and black Che. I have the original of that and some overlays and other historical stuff. Because you have to remember, once this started going viral, we call it viral now, when I was over in London, 3 months later, I saw the Che everywhere, my Che, right? And my name had been removed off the ones I saw.
Right.
But my hidden logo was there still.
Wow.
But then, like everything else, I decided I would make it copyright free. I announced it grandly in the evening press in an interview that it's revolutionary art for the people and it's copyright free. Not realizing that copyright free meant every gouger was going to make a t-shirt out of it, whoever could afford it. But that was my intention. My intention was to proliferate. I did an interview at the time where I said I expected to breed like rabbits.
Well, there we
Anyways.
go. Yeah.
And just you're talking about the Che Guevara art and stuff, and obviously the fact that everyone could recreate it. But I'm just wondering, how do you feel about it if you see something where I've seen versions that have been like made to look like Yoda or different interpretations of it? And how do you feel as an artist when something is transformed like that? Or
if it's respectful, it doesn't bother me. There was one version of it where Che was a dog, and that annoyed the crap out of me, you know.
Yeah.
I've seen it used by right-wing sites. If you ever saw them, they have the Che image with the bar, put the kind of no entry sign on them. They've had Che as a skeleton. But as far as I'm concerned, the longer he annoys them, the better, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't bother me at all. I just feel people like that, I love to put it in their face, you know?
And even on...
what's the word you used to... It wasn't him that said it. Art is to disturb the comfortable and comfort No, not the comfort of the disturbed. I've got it arseways, whatever way it is. That's my version. Art is the comfort of the disturbed. But anyway, it's to, it's the comfort. Art is to comfort the oppressed. It's as simple as that. And I think that's what the Che does. I think a lot of people who are of the left use it. I know all over Latin America it was used by Chavez, not Moreno, what's his name in Bolivia? They all used it for the political posters. I used it for Joe Higgins for the small election in County Cork at one stage. And it's been, I don't mind anybody using it as long as it's for some kind of purpose as opposed to just entertainment. But when you put something out there, it's like Pandora's box. I can't just shut the box and stop them doing Yoda with Che Guevara. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember my youngest son shocked me. My son is rebellious like myself. When he was about 11, by walking in wearing the Che Guevara Planet of the Apes t-shirt. It's the monkey here. And I was going like,
Yeah.
But that was to wind me up,
Yeah. And on your website, you have a print there that people can download. Like it says on your website for those kind of purposes of just promoting something that's kind of helping people and that kind of, I suppose, left-leaning politics and kind of the Workers' Party and that kind of stuff, not people who are going to make money out of it as such.
Well, if the caveat is that you cannot download it for commercial purposes. What it says on the website is that this image is yours free. You can download it in high resolution. You can print it for yourself and your friends, but don't sell it. Right? I want it to proliferate. I've got the tools to proliferate now. I have a following through my social media platforms of about 50, 60,000. And the download rate of the Che is quite extraordinary, the number of people who download it. I'm sure there's people ripping it off on t-shirts and everything, but I don't see many of them using my version. There's an altered version. I know my little keynote stuff I put in there. It's like there's a curlicue on the hair at one point, and there's a little space. If that space isn't there, it's just somebody's copied it. So they don't really, what's the word for it, rip me off.
Yeah.
But I allow people to use it for themselves. They can have it on their walls. They can put it in their schools. It was on a Chuck D video. I met Chuck D actually shortly afterwards. But it's on a Chuck D video for, I always get him mixed up. He's NWA, I think. Which one was he the founder of? NWA or the other guys? That can come to. Anyway, Chuck D is one of the great hip-hop rappers of all time. And people like that using it in a school context on a video, I found electrifying because Americans go nuts with that image. It's like the ultimate image to annoy people with. Try wearing it in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Get your head battened in, It's a symbol of rebellion. And it's not a symbol of rebellion that even the old Soviet Union felt comfortable with. They banned it,
Right.
It's banned in a lot of, like Poland and Hungary, I think, have banned it. It's banned in a lot of places, Authoritarian regimes don't like that Che image because it suggests rebellion and it romanticizes rebellion. I'll give you a simple example. During the Argentinian mass murder, when the military took over, the dirty war, a young man called Brodsky, a Jewish kid with long hair, very, very good looking. And the only remaining photograph of him is wearing a Che t-shirt. That was enough to get him beaten to death and tortured.
Right.
He was only 17.
Yeah.
I've often thought of doing a drawing of him, because those people who did it are all still living happily ever after. They're old, but they got away with it,
It is amazing though that the power that an image like that can have. Like I said, like you drew it for a purpose, but the fact that could still just resonate so much in today's world, it never has kind of lost its power.
Oh, if anything, I think it's changed. It's kind of morphed into a symbol of just freedom more than anything else, freedom of thought even. Because if you read the writings of Che Guevara, it's all very interesting. His attitudes and the way, like he's accused of being anti-black, and yet if you read his diaries, his best friend was black. So when he's in the Congo, he's over there with his men, and he's saying, I can't work without my buddy So he gets his buddy sent over from Cuba to be with him in Africa. You know what I mean? Not because he fits into Africa because he's black, but because he's his friend.
Yeah.
Castro was the one who was very anti-homosexual and put homosexuals in correction camps, a bit like conversion therapy in America. But he, like Che, he changed and he learned, as he said himself, that he was wrong. Homosexuals were our brothers and sisters, and we persecuted them, and we were wrong. How many fucking regimes do that?
Yeah,
how many American governments admit that conversion therapy was wrong, is wrong? It's still going on.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
With every regime, like the Cuban regime, it's not all flowers and fucking, romance and wine. It can be very harsh because you're changing a government, you're changing a whole system. Imagine if the Cuban Revolution happened here. What's the first thing that happened if I was Che? Get rid of all the lawyers, get rid of all the judges, get rid of that whole cartel and find the honest ones and put them in charge. There's plenty of honest judges, plenty of honest lawyers. We don't get them. We get the trash. We get attorney generals who are, this guy, present guy's Fianna Fáil, has just cleared Leo of breaking all the fucking rules. Before that, it was Wolf, who told us that we couldn't sign the Occupied Territories Bill because it was unconstitutional, which is rubbish. That's the sort of quality of judge we have.
Yeah.
Don't get me going. All I'm saying is that most people getting out the fuck out of Ireland, and mostly I pay them to drive them out,
Did you
and build a proper society where people are equal before the law. Start there.
Did you ever get to meet him when he was in Ireland?
I did. I met him. That's what got me interested in Che Guevara. I was working as a barman down in Kilkee in the Marine Hotel under a guy called Hawk. I have to be careful because his two daughters were at a meeting. I was about to go into how he was, trying to pull down the knickers of one of the fucking staff and had to stop him. And I hear a voice saying, "Oh, we're Hawk." And I said, "Oh, really?" So you want to be careful. But I got a job down there anyway. And myself and Gilbert Brosnan, my friend who still lives up the hill from me, the two of us were sent down to earn money for a pilgrimage to Rome. Because we were Franciscans in Gormanston, we weren't allowed to take family money. We had to earn everything ourselves. So myself and Gilbert were sent down to Kilkee, the most remote place in Ireland back then. There was no bus, the bus went once a week on Sundays. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was crazy. To get there was just epic. And to get home, I hitchhiked home. Jesus, it took me 3 days. But once we were down there, I had the time of my life. The freedom I had and the money I had as a barman was just amazing, And instead of going on a pilgrimage to Rome, I spent it all on the fucking flashy bicycle. But anyway, Gilbert was down there and I was working in the bar. Gilbert was the waiter. When Che Guevara walked in, there was two mates, his muchachos. And of course, being an Irish kid, you're curious. I said, "What are you doing here?" And he went, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Che Guevara." And he said, "Yeah." And he was amazed that I recognized him. But I was educated by Franciscans. They showed us newsreels before the movies every Saturday night in the Assembly Hall. And the Cuban Revolution, with all these guys sitting on tanks with long hair and beards coming through, Havana. Like we were all going, whoopee, because the priests were all on the side of the revolution. They had a huge missionary presence in Latin America. And they were like liberation theology from Father Leonardo Boff, a Franciscan. It comes from the Franciscans, who are, to me, wonderful priests. I'm still friendly with his, well, he's not the head honcho anymore. He's retired down to Cork. He's too old now. But, he was the head of the whole Franciscan universe in Rome. And overnight, he's told to pack his case and go home.
Right.
He has one case, that's all. They own nothing.
Yeah.
So there is a reality to it, and we all try and help them out. I've sent them books and posters and stuff, and we have a collection every now and then to try and doesn't lead a normal life,
Yeah.
And he's a lovely man who taught me art, so he deserves it, and we can drag him up whenever we have a school reunion, which might be next year, if we're all still alive. But I always admired their commitment to justice and human rights, stuff I'd never heard of, They didn't call it human rights. They just call it saving people. And they put their necks on the line. Many of them were executed by barbarous regimes in El Salvador, in the Dominican Republic, during the Nicaraguan War, you name it. They were on the front line. They're brilliant. Father Brendan Ford actually started the Peace Villages. He lived in Clontarf. He was one of my classmates, schoolmates. And he started the Peace Villages in the middle of the Civil War between FARC and the government in Colombia. And they still exist. The idea of a Peace Village was nobody was allowed in that was armed. So you can imagine the hassle he was getting from FARC. And then when he wasn't getting hassle from FARC, the government presumed he was FARC.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But he survived. He's still there. It was very courageous, much more courageous than I'd be in that situation.
Things were scary in Colombia at that time, for sure.
Absolutely, still are.
Yeah.
And of course, FARC were using the Che Guevara symbol, which brings me to another story. The commandante of the province, the oil-rich province, found two young lads, one Irish, one Spanish. Tristan was the Irish kid's name, and they were beheaded by them and their phones stolen, right? By Commandante Gonzalez. I worked with his mother to do a portrait of him so we'd remember him. The government were not interested. That young man was murdered by one of the most brutal of the FARC guerrilla commanders. But they couldn't do anything about him because I spoke to Moralanda at the time, the head of FARC. He controlled the oil-rich areas. They needed him.
Right.
So an Irish kid was just a casualty, you know? But that annoyed the shit out of me to the point where I put it out publicly that if they used that Che image, I would literally publish his brutality everywhere that he used the image, you know, to counter it. And I had people in Colombia prepared to risk their lives to do that. You know? So it can be very double-sided too, you know. The idea of someone as brutal as that using the Che image annoyed the crap out of me.
Of course, it would, yeah.
I always remember
Commandante Gonzalez. He got away with it, still there.
I always remember there's a story about the filmmaker David Lynch, and he had Roy Orbison doing one of his songs in Blue Velvet, and Roy Orbison didn't like the idea that it was being used in a violent scene, that the gangster character was using it. And then David Lynch said, "You think everyone who likes your music is a nice person?" And it was like this epiphany for Roy Orbison. I always thought it was like an interesting moment for him. Like, it's just you can't tell where it's going to go.
Well, that was the strangest of all. No, I've never run into any real problems. A right-wing organization called the Warriors of Christ were using some of my work. The Ku Klux Klan were using some of my Celtic work to show white superiority over the force of darkness. You couldn't make it up. But that was the only time I've ever felt I'm stopping that guy using the Che. Now, I've tried to use that kind of weight against the cigarette company that uses the image, my image of Che on a cigarette pack, right? Which I have inside. If you want to see it, I'll bring it into you. But that's all over Europe, Italy, France, Germany, and now Japan. And it's my image, pure and simple, ripped off. And they ripped it off by going to the European IPO, which is supposed to protect artists and copyright, and simply getting permission from them to use it. They never bothered to pick up the fucking phone and ring me or find out who actually it belonged to, you know?
Right.
But I don't have the money to fight them. I can simply, all I can do is shame them, which I've been trying to do.
Yeah. But what was obviously the fight to get back the copyright? Was that like a grueling thing? Was it cathartic?
No. I decided with my son now taking over my website that I would take back the Che. So all you have to do, because I know copyright law, is rerun it. So I went up the road to Advantage Printers, the only screen printing company left I could find anywhere in Ireland or England who could do high quality. And they reprinted the entire Che, and I copyrighted it from 2012, right? So any use of it since 2012 by the cigarette company leaves them liable for millions. If I find somebody to take them on, but I can't. Somebody did try to help, but they didn't take it any further. I've had offers from solicitors. They said they'll do it. They never do it. It just becomes too big, you know?
Yeah.
Now, long and short of the story is, it is finding its place again among revolutionary movements. I'd love to see it used in Ireland. I tried to use it. I've just used it only about 2 months ago for the 40th anniversary of the blockade. I put it in Spanish above it. I can't remember the Spanish. I copied it from what they gave me. And the Cubans used that as an anti-blockade poster, you know. So it does have power and resonance. I've used it in, I did a version, an anti-apartheid version for Palestine, with the Palestine flag across his face. And I kind of tried to encourage people to use it creatively and politically, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's used. I worked with about 5 different fucking armies during the Syrian war. They're down to about 2 now. But one was the YPG and the Rojava women, and they have used it everywhere. But I also did an image of their Che Guevara, which is Abdullah Öcalan, who's in jail for life, and that was very successful. You know, give you an idea. The image I used, the TUC had their annual conference 2 years ago, and every one of the delegates held up that image I created of Öcalan. You know?
There you go.
It's always been one of my favorite causes, you know. Now with what's happening in Afghanistan tells us that he'll do the same fucking thing in Syria and leave them high and dry for the Turks to massacre, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to talk about your website as well, because there's so much on it for people who want to go to it, to jimfitzpatrick.com, that people can buy different prints and different types of prints of. There's just so much there for people to browse through, and really something for everyone. In terms of the website itself, was that something that you always wanted to use to sell your artwork that way, or did that come about by accident, or did people say you needed a website?
The minute Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet, I think I decided I wanted a website, even though I didn't know what a fucking website was. And I had a stroke of luck. A guy called Lorcan Brophy, who worked for Telecom Éireann at the time, was the marketing guy. And he decided that he would show how websites work, like building a website for me.
Right.
Oh,
so since 1996, I've had a website.
That's early for Ireland, especially.
Now, it wasn't selling anything. It was just promoting my work. And it was huge because my work went worldwide so quickly that I thought I was being ripped off left, right, and center. I didn't understand the nature of sharing on the internet. It's a whole new experience, you know? So I got huge numbers. And then a company called Ojo started, and they were building websites that sold prints and everything. So I went with them until they went bust. And when they went bust, my own son, who lives in LA, said, I had no experience building websites, but he went onto WordPress and learned how to build a website. And that's kept myself and my daughter has a scarf business. She lives in Italy. He lives in LA. He runs the website. She runs the whole scarf business. And today I have 2 watercolors of Philip to do for a client, all from the website. And I live off the website. Without it, I'd be gone. Because when you're old, hot bands ain't looking for you. It's a terrible feeling. I mean,
it's their loss, though. Their loss.
I follow all these Irish hip hop bands, mostly from Limerick. Denise, Chyla, Russ and Gano, Family, Murley, God knows, JLOL from Dublin. There's so many of them, and it's a big Irish hip hop movement. The Baldy Boys, or what the fuck, the Bally Boys, white guys, rappers, and they're just brilliant, you know. And sometimes if you're interested in something and you express it, as I do frequently, and write to people about it. I wrote to Chuck D to say, you got to check out hip hop, you know what I mean? To try and get that attention to it. And all you need is somebody to react and help these people, because there's how are they earning money at the moment? They can't fucking perform.
No.
They're living off SoundCloud. People like myself paying a $5 for a fucking record, you know what I mean? They need help, you know? But they're the sort of people I follow at the moment. I love all that. Jeez, a whole new movement before my eyes, you know?
It is. So when you were talking about being a foil and stuff, and I went blank on Chuck D as well. And I was thinking, well, it's like the Public Enemy #1. And I remembered Public Enemy. That was not in Chuck D, it was in Public Enemy. But it was funny
Public
how
Enemy were one of my favorite bands. And my favorite band of all time was the combination of Sex Pistols and Tin Lizzie, right? And they played the Stardust once, right? And it was the best and the worst all the time, because after I said to Philip, Jesus, the electricity is incredible, right?
Yeah.
And he said, Jim, that's fucking fine. Look at me trousers. They were covered in snot where they gob you. You know what I mean? I thought, this isn't suiting either of us.
The glamour side of rock and roll.
They were called the Greedies. Originally, like the Pogues were called Pogue Mahone, became the Pogues. The Greedies were the greedy bastards. So they turned into the Greedies. And they had a big hit with Christmas number called Jingle Bells, Jangle Bells. Fucking brilliant. Steve Cook and the guys, you know. I just wish Johnny Rotten had been there too, you know.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure.
Not at all enjoyable. Glad you like your comics. What got you into comics?
Yeah, when I was 6 years old, I went into kind of what you said about there used to be a comic shop hidden in the back room of like a photography store, and someone told me to go in there. And when I went in, it was just like seeing the whole thing. It was just like magic to me. Like, just actually, the first comic I ever bought was a Silver Surfer comic. Actually, weirdly enough.
Oh yeah! Wow. Oh no, I was very lucky. I just love Marvel comics, and I've always been a collector of stamps and a collector of printed ephemera and all kinds of rubbish. But comics, I have still some of the comics I had when I was sick with pleurisy. They were called The Sun and the Comet, with Battler Britain fighting the Nazis. I learned all my German from those comics. Like, what was it? Donner and Blitzen, you know, the Crouch used to shout when they got hit, Donner and Blitzen, turned out they're fucking reindeer. It was all that kind of racist stuff. Quite brilliant. Quite brilliant at the time. And, you know, I think you either love comics or you don't get it at all.
Yeah. And
my
father could never figure out what I saw in them at all. Like, you know.
My mother copped that I loved all that sort of stuff. She used to buy them for me. My aunts as well. But one of my greatest moments of all time was this very simple one when I was at the guest of San Diego, and my minder brought me down to meet Jack Kirby and his wife, because Jack had asked about me. And when I shook hands with Jack Kirby, he introduced me to his wife and said to her, "This is the young man we've heard so much about." Thought, whoa. That's one of the greatest things I'll ever hear in my life, because he was my hero. You know?
Yeah.
And in my book, Aaron Saga, I credit him with having a huge influence with those double-page spreads and all the stuff he did, you know, on my Celtic work, you know. He had that epic quality that I tried to get into my work, you know.
Yeah, you can see like Thor in particular as well, obviously, all the Norse stuff they did. Yeah. Actually, you mentioned the Silver Age, and it's like my favorite era of comics as well, so great stuff.
It was fabulous. And Kirby did wonderful, wonderful work for Pacific Comics. I don't know if you've ever seen them. You know, I have every one of them. They're just fucking staggering. And his last project, you'll only get it on the net, because I haven't been able to get a hold of it. If you come across it, let me know. It's called Lord of Light. And it's the finest Kirby work of all time. Really is. The last stuff, he did it for a movie.
Yeah.
The work.
He was brought on for like work for like concept art and later in his career, wasn't he? Like for lots of films. And,
yeah, but this is his greatest work. I think it's just extraordinary. Like, holy fuck. Dayglow, fluorescent, psychedelic humor, you know. I love psychedelic.
And even like his use of collage as well. He used to bring that stuff into the DC stuff. Yeah.
He was the very first. He inspired the cover of Nightlife, which incidentally, just to talk very quickly on Lizzie and then I'll go, on the cover of Nightlife, if you look in the foreground, right, in the back there's the city, there's the big cutout moon line drop out, and there's a panther in the foreground, right? And it's a Black Panther, a tribute to the Black Panthers who I was in touch with at the time, Huey Newton and all the guys. And only recently did I publish the fact that we knew what we were doing, because I told Philip, and Philip said, "Shut the fuck up, or they won't play it on BBC." Right?
Yeah.
Now, I only told him what I'd done when we were walking down Shaftesbury Avenue to the big lounge in a record shop, and the windows were plastered with it. And I said to Philip, casually, what do you think of the Black Panther, Philip? And he said, oh, it's great, Jim. Yeah. And I said, no, the Black Panther. He said, the what? I said, the Black Panther, Hugh Newton, the guys, Bob Carlos, the Olympic, because it was inspired by Bob Carlos, this stuff.
Yeah.
And he said, you mean the fucking Black Panthers? And I said, yeah, it's a tribute to them. And he said, fuck. I never told anybody until about 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And recently, a friend of mine in Hollywood, who's friends with Nile Rodgers, told Nile Rodgers the story, because Nile Rodgers was a member of the Black Panthers. He couldn't believe an Irish guy was putting a Black Panther on the cover of an album in Britain and the UK that went to be obviously an album in America as well. So there's a story behind every one of those. There's always politics or tricks. Like the Jailbreak one is very Marvel Comics one. The Vagabonds is, an element of Marvel Comics with there's all little hidden stories there as well. Johnny the Fox is Neo-Celtic, and there's different elements in different times, but the only really political one was Nightlife, That's the one I'm most proud of, because we got away with it.
He snuck it in there.
Yeah.
The funniest thing before you go, I must tell you, there was an ad in Melody Maker. See, in those days, you sent your artwork over to England, or you brought it under your arm into the record company, and they did all the things, the derivations, the posters, and they could do crazy shit. There's nothing to do with your artwork, right?
Yeah.
So there was a long, thin column advertising Jailbreak in Melody Maker. I have a copy of it. And because my image didn't fit very well, they used this image of a jumping panther, right? It was the real logo. The Black Panther Party they fucking used. And I said to Philip, Jesus Christ, have they not copped? They hadn't a clue. They thought they were just ripping something off that nobody would notice.
Yeah.
But again, we got away with it, but barely. When I saw that, we're fucked,
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, how different history could have been if they only knew.
Well, back then you have to remember they banned John Lennon for Sunday Bloody Sunday. No, that was, what was it called? It was was it called Bloody Sunday? Sunday Bloody Sunday is U2.
Yeah.
They banned Ireland for the Irish by Paul McCartney. There was another one banned as well. What was there was 3 Beatles. I mean, the Beatles were all Irish, anyway, even Ringo. But John Lennon was completely committed to Ireland. He was a huge Irish patriot. Nobody really seems to realize that. And he was vocal, and he marched against Bloody Sunday, against people being shot. He was very active and helped us with Capella as well. But art and music and literature are never simple. They contain people's lives within them. And in my body of work, even though a lot of it is flimsy, a lot of it is fun, a lot of it is mythological, there's always a core of belief in politics, right? And it may not necessarily mean that I'm putting political messages into goddesses and everything, but with the goddesses, I'm saying something important as well. I'm trying to emphasize the importance of women in Irish society in prehistory, right up to historical times of Queen Maeve, and the importance and the role of women. And I know, for instance, that Sinead O'Connor, who I also did album covers for, the very first time I met her, she told me that she had a poster of Palu, the goddess, on her wall when she was going through horrific abuse. And she used to look at that and say, I'm going to be like that one day. Do you know what I mean? So even something as trivial as drawing Celtic goddesses and all their beauty and finery can have immense impact in ways that you never think about,
And I think that's why they resonate. I think people can tell, even subconsciously, there's something there deeper. There's a deeper meaning, just like beyond the image.
It comes from one thing. It comes from passion,
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor meeting you.
Nice to talk to you guys.